Hello, Professor Eva.
Hello.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Nice. So I will present you to everyone, and just in some seconds, you can begin your speech. So my name is Bernardo. I'm a student at the master's program in the structural engineering department here, and I will be supporting the presentation of Professor Eva. At the end of her presentation, she will open for questions, and you guys can ask me in Portuguese, and I can translate for you if you want. Okay? So are you set, Professor?
Yes.
So can go ahead. Thank you.
Let me share my screen with you. So my presentation for today is called 10 Planning Concepts I Wish I'd Known Before My PhD. And in this presentation, I will give you an overview of some essential soft skills regarding planning that can be very useful for you during your PhD. Now, as you know, when we do research, we don't know the outcome of our work.
Professor, just 1 second. Can you move up this little screen that appears in your screen for us?
Sorry?
This little screen, you're showing us to ourselves. Can you move just so it's not in front of the...
Like that?
Nice. Thank you.
All right. So as I was saying, when we do research, we don't really know the outcome of our work. So that's why I have here this banana that turns out to be a kiwi on the inside, which is a good metaphor for what we do in research at some times. So you may ask, how can you plan the unexpected? And I will go into that, of course. And my presentation for today is actually dealing with 3 different parts. They're interwoven, but I deal with concepts of planning, elements of planning, and then some practical tools that you can be using for planning. So one of the first steps, or the first step when you plan your work during your PhD or for any other research project, is you need to know your milestones. Your milestones can be the requirements for graduation, so that that can be the maximum time that you have to defend your thesis, as well as other requirements that you have to fulfill for graduation along the way. If you have a funded project, that can also be the project deliverables. Your project may be broken down into several tasks that each require a report on that task. So those would be the deliverables of your project. So these milestones are the big steps in your planning. You need to know what you need to do. That's the and how you need to fulfill that requirement, as well as when you need to fulfill that requirement. And this figure here gives you an idea of an example of one university that shows the milestones that they expect from their PhD students. Your university may have something similar, or you may want to set it up for yourself. In terms of tools for planning in terms of milestones, what you can do is use a specific tool for this, and the website that I show here is Clad NVIDIA. It's a website that was developed for PhD students in the Netherlands. And what is nice about this is that it uses sort of pictograms to show what you should be working on and when your milestones are, with these signs that you have a milestone coming up. What I use is a Google Calendar instead. So I have in the past used long stretches of time in my Google Calendar from the time that I need to start on it until a milestone. And you can see here a print screen of my Google Calendar from a couple of years ago when I was writing my PhD thesis. I had blocked most of the month of April to deliver one chapter of my thesis, as well as start to work on a report that I had to deliver. And showing that, you can already see a little bit of my planning. But the main concept here is that I plan backwards. So first you need to know for planning what you need to do. So you need to have a task list, and that can be at different levels of detail. In order to be working on your tasks, you want to have ranges of weeks and days. And as I said, I plan backwards. So plan the last task first and then work backwards. So when you do that, you know which task should be finished when and during which period of time you should be working on what. Now, to illustrate this, I have here an example. Say you want to write a conference paper. The first thing that you need to do is outline all the tasks that you should schedule. And I have here a list. So the first task that I have in here are writing parts of the paper itself, the introduction, literature review, methods, results, discussion, summary, and conclusions. You also may need some time to work on making your figures, compiling information in tables. You need time to proofread. You need time to format and check your references. If you use automatic referencing software, which I strongly recommend, you still need to check if everything goes well, if there's no errors in there. Then you want to send your work to your co-authors, and then you need to plan time to meet and discuss with your co-authors, and then time for implementing changes. So if we take these tasks and turn that into a planning, we work backwards. So we start with the deadline for the conference paper. Instead of using that, I always use a self-imposed target deadline, which gives me some buffer between the actual deadline when the conference system may be closed for submission and when I want to submit my work. So that can be 2 to 3 weeks before the deadline, and sometimes I put 1 month, 1.5 months before the deadline to make sure I certainly don't miss a deadline and can capture anything unexpected on the way, the kiwi inside of the banana, as we called it. If we take that as our deadline, it means that the last time I want to proofread my work is about 2 days before that target submission deadline. That's when I want to block some time to work on that, which means I have about 1 week before that date to make changes, which means I need to meet with my co-authors before I make changes, which means that I need to send my paper to my co-authors with sufficient time so that they can read it. So I typically use 2 to 3 weeks. So they have sufficient time to read it, which means that before then that I have to have proofread it. So that's about 3 days before sending it out. And then 1 week before then that, I may want to work on the figures, and writing the text may take me 4 weeks. Not 4 weeks of 8 hours every day, but 4 weeks of chunks of time that I work on drafting the text. So if I sum up all of this, you see that we should be starting on this paper 14 weeks before the deadline. That may be a little bit surprising. You may typically start just 2 weeks before the deadline, or even 2 days before the deadline. And if you're really in a hurry, or if you haven't planned very well, these 14 weeks, of course, as I said before, is not 14 weeks of 8 hours of work every day. It's just having sufficient time, having sufficient buffer to deal with unexpected situations, and time to slowly process your work and have time to discuss this with your co-authors. As a reference to this, I have left here a link to a blog post by Raúl Pacheco Vega that was titled Planning the Timeline and Progress of Your Doctoral Dissertation, that deals with this idea of planning backwards, or backcasting, as he calls it, for a full PhD project. So that's recommended reading if you want to learn a little bit more about that. A third concept is that I recommend planning at different levels. There's the milestones that may be, as I said before, your graduation requirements or the deliverables of your project. Besides that, you want to have a planning per year, per semester, per month, per week, and per day. As you go from the milestones, which are very broadly defined, towards per day, where you have specifically defined tasks, it can help to know what you want to achieve at different levels by breaking down larger tasks into smaller levels to get, as I said, these specific tasks that you want to be working on a certain day. So in terms of tools for this, what I use is an analog bullet journal for writing down my milestones. At this moment, I don't have any projects running that are for more than 1 year, so I don't have the planning at the level of a number of years as you may have during your PhD, but I have planning on an annual level. So that planning per year, I have it as my goals in my bullet journal, as I mentioned before. I have events and as well periods of time that I may be traveling, doing field work, etc., or being at conferences in my Google Calendar. And I put reminders of things that will be coming up further in the future in the application that is called Todoist, which is a free application that runs in the cloud. So you can have it on your desktop, on the website, on your phone, etc. Per semester, I narrow this down into things that I need to achieve for the projects that I have running within a specific semester, and I write that down on a list in my bullet journal. The same per month, I narrow it further down, or I take subtasks, put them in my bullet journal. And then per week, what I do is I use a weekly template, and I'll talk a little more about that in just a minute, that I have in my Google Calendar. And then I have no more than 5 priorities for the week, which I write on the whiteboard that I have behind me in my office that I can show you in just a moment when I move my camera, as well as my bullet journal again. And I will show you some photographs of that in just a minute as well. And then per day, I write down the priorities. What do I want to be writing? What do I want to be doing for research? And other priorities for the day. I write them down because I've learned that I like writing in ink and having something physical. And then all the small tasks I add to my Todoist. May sound very abstract, but I will show you screenshot, etc., as we move through this. So here's a screenshot of my Todoist, and I took that right when I was working on this presentation, which was exactly a month ago. And you can see that I have here on the right-hand side, I have it in different projects. So you see that I have things that are related to administration, research tasks, service tasks, personal things, something for TRB that I'm working on, and then tasks related to the journal of which I'm the editor-in-chief. And anything that I need to remember goes in my Todoist. And you see the ones that have this little circle here are tasks that repeat automatically. So I want to say, for example, every day at 9 p.m., I want to make my planning for the next day, and that I have here as a repeat task. So when you need to remember things, or when you want to follow up with somebody regarding a pending item, I find Todoist very useful for that. But when it comes to priorities, as I said, I like writing down things. So what you can see here is a picture that I took of a spread that I use in my bullet journal. And the layout that I use is I have on the left-hand side here per day what I need to be working on. I also like to keep track of the number of words that I've written, as well as my nemesis, my mailbox, which is always overflowing. So I try to work on it every day. So I note down how many emails I get at the beginning of the day and how many are left at the end of the day. And then I hope that the balance is positive so that I've at least managed to knock off some items there. The weekly priorities I have on my right-hand side here. And you can see that my work goals are divided in 5 categories, all of which are important for me at this moment: writing, doing research, service to the profession, teaching, and administration. I also put goals related to relationships with others and things that I want to achieve for myself. And then on the bottom, I have a list of things that I have achieved during the week, which is what I use to review my month at the end of the month. At a monthly level, as I said, I use my Google Calendar for planning chunks of time. So you see that I have here when we had holidays at the university marked up, a trip that I had planned. And other than that, for this month, I did not block off weeks for certain things. But that's how I have things in my Google Calendar. And as I said before, I use my Google Calendar for setting up a weekly template. So the idea has been discussed by and been blogged about by a number of people. One blog post that I found very useful for this and that I recommend that you read is this here of Raul Pacheco Vega, again, titled Scheduling My Academic Life to the Very Minute. And the idea is that you create a template for your week to fit in all the categories of things that you should be working on, the major categories. So for you as a PhD student, that may be the courses that you're taking, writing of conference papers, journal papers, your PhD thesis, research tasks, time for reading papers, which especially during your PhD is important to keep track of new research that comes out or reading some references from the past that you haven't had a chance to look at, and then email administration, things like that. So that would be to set up a general template for, I typically do that per semester because it's related to the courses that in my case, that I teach. And then every Friday I set aside a little bit of time to see what the template translates to for the coming week. So I adjust my weekly template to include meetings and then update each of these categories with the specifics, what I should be working on. So what does it look like? Let's look at some screenshots that I took of how I use this. I took a screenshot of a week in the future in which I have not altered my template yet. So you can see this is pretty much what my template for this semester looks like. It already has a little bit of overlapping things because I have been adding on scheduled weekly meetings with my students, which were not defined yet at the moment that I set up my template. But this is what my template looks like. And you see that first thing I do every morning is writing, working on my publications. If then we look at a week of 1 month ago when I was working on this presentation, you see that I update, for example, my block to write has been turned in what I should precisely be working on. So in this one is addressing reviewer comments for a paper that I'm working on. The next day I was working on another paper. Then on this day, on the 14th, I had a conference call. Now I usually don't really like taking calls or meetings during my writing time because that's the time that I try to protect to move my publications forward. When I need to discuss things with people in Europe because of the time difference, I have to take them in the early morning. So that's the call here. And you see there's other meetings in there that got scheduled, and then specifics for the research tasks. And also block some time for fun things to do on the weekend. Then concept number 5 that I wanted to introduce is always to plan buffer. So as I already showed you with the example of planning backwards for the conference paper, there was always a little bit of extra time in there. That's the buffer that I'm talking about. So you don't want to miss a deadline. You want to have that buffer to deal with anything unexpected. So for that reason, start early when you need to work on something. Start early before a deadline and use a self-imposed deadline. So you can see here the time buffer, how that fits into your general planning. Now, when we talk about planning, you may think only about work, but it's super important to as well plan time for things that are important for you. Plan enough time to sleep, plan time to eat, plan time for exercise, and plan time for the things that are what I call non-negotiable self-care. These are things that you need in your life to be a functioning human being. So if that for you means hanging out with your friends, don't tell them I'm too busy with my PhD. Reserve time for them, because your PhD doesn't stop life. And that's why I said goals and categories. As you've seen from the picture that I was showing from my bullet journal, I said different categories. I look at work, things that I want to achieve for myself, and relationships. So anything that's related to my family, my friends, work relationships as well. Finding the time and doing things together with the people that are important to me. And that's an idea that I got from this book, which I found very interesting to read. It's called Off the Clock, Feel Less Busy While Getting More Done, and it's written by Laura Vanderkam. Now, all of this is related to planning. A tool that I really like to improve planning is to actually track your time, because when you know how you spend your time, you can plan better. So the idea is that when you have the data that shows how you're actually spending your time, you can analyze what's going on. So you can track how you spend your time both at work as well as in general for the 168 hours you have in a week. When you track your time, you can know how much time certain tasks take you, so that you can, next time that you have to plan a similar task, you have a better idea of how much time it takes you. It also helps to analyze when you are more productive. It may be that, just for me, my best hours for writing are early in the morning, but it can be that you need 5 espresso shots in the morning to feel like mildly human. So maybe the morning may not be the best time of the day for you to write. So it's important to just know yourself and know when you're your most productive and when you work best. Tracking can help with that. And similarly, when are you distracted? So tracking can help with that. I will show you a few tools that you can use for this purpose. The first one is called Rescue Time. It's an application that you can download, and that just runs in the background of your computer, and it analyzes how productive you are. This shows you a weekly dashboard, but you can also look at it per day, so see which hour of the day or which time of the day you're more productive and when you're less productive. And how this works is it runs in the background, as I said, and it analyzes what you're doing. So if you are in Microsoft Word or in EndNote or in MATLAB, you can tell this software that that's productive time. On the other hand, if you're reading random entries on Wikipedia, you may tag that as distracted time. So it runs in the background, it it analyzes what you're doing and whether that's productive or not productive, and then it shows you these plots. So it's quite neat. Another tool that I use is Toggle, and that's a cloud-based application that you can have on your desktop, on your phone, as well as on the website. And what it does, what I use it for, is for tracking how much time I spend on my different projects, and then at the end of the month or week or whichever time period I want to analyze, I can see how I've been dividing my time across the different projects and responsibilities that I have. So I find it quite useful to check how much time I've spent on everything, how I divide my time, and how much time things are taking me. Now, planning and tracking time without thinking about what we're doing may not be that useful. So what I like to do is at the end of the month, before I make my planning for the next month, I stop for a moment and I make a list of what I've done, and I reflect on how my last month has been before planning the next month. And I try to learn from the experience of the month before. This is an idea that I got from the book Mastering Your PhD by Bart Noordam and Patricia Gosling. It's also published on the website of Science Magazine. You have the link here. The title of the post was Running in Place. And one of the things that they discuss is this monthly progress monitor. They show 4 questions that you can ask yourself to reflect on your month. These questions are: of the results I obtained last month, which are the most important? Did I deviate from last month's planning? If so, why? What are my most important goals for the upcoming month, and how do I overcome potential hurdles? What I use for myself is as well 4 questions, slightly different from what they use in Mastering Your PhD. But I look at what did I complete, and for that I revise the logs of the week that I make per week to see what I've completed in a month. And then I compare that to the planning that I had for my month and see what I did not complete. And I take a moment to think about what happened. Did something turn out to be more difficult? Did I have delays with a co-author, etc.? What went well? I typically write a short reflection on what went well and what didn't work. For me personally, I wrote down this month I had difficulties with it and that, and I tried to see what I can do to improve it. And I do this not just for my work, but in general for things that I want to achieve for myself and my relationship with others. The second to last topic that I want to tell you is, I've mentioned it before, but you have 168 hours per week. So 168 hours is a lot of time. And this idea I got from another book by Laura Vanderkam, an author who I really like. It's titled 168 Hours You Have More Time Than You Think. And here you see a breakdown of what it looks like. If you sleep 8 hours a night, work 40 hours, it can be a little more, but shouldn't be that much more. Even if you have 42 hours with your family eating and commuting, you still have 30 hours to, here it says, to pursue your dream, or it can be to change the world, and I would be happy if all of you go and do that. But it can also be 30 hours to do things you like, work out, go to the movie theater, etc. Do things that you enjoy doing. And just as I track my time for work, every now and then I track a week of time to see how I'm spending it and if it sort of is balanced across different categories of things that are important in my life. Main category, as you see, and here is a week that I tracked in January of this year. Main categories are, of course, sort of predictable: sleep, work, and then time with my family, time with my daughter, time for working out, for reading, and for doing my housework. And then the last and maybe most important topic here is I have shown you some things from screenshots of my planning tools, pictures of my bullet journal. That's what works for me at this moment in my life. I was using other methods in the past. I've been adjusting them as my personal life changes, as my work situation changes. And the same for you. It's not that you say, okay, tomorrow I will do the Eva method and I will have it all figured out. No, unfortunately, it's something very personal. Try out things, see what works for you, see what you like, and have fun with it as well along the way. And I find it very similar to writing. You may notice as a PhD student, when you start writing, that learning how to find your voice and authority as an academic writer is a journey, and it takes going back and forth and seeing how others do it, but also trying things out for yourself. Planning is very similar, so find what works for you. So to conclude, it's important to plan your work, even though there are big uncertainties related to research. You may have large milestones that are not very well defined, but as you go narrowing down and you have your daily task list, it helps to know what you should be doing when during a certain day. There are tools that can help you. I've shown you a couple of screenshots as well as pictures from my bullet journal. As I just said, it is a journey, so it's trying out things, see what works for you, what doesn't work, and have fun along the way. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I want to tell you that on this topic, there's 2 books of mine that may be of your interest. I have the course text from Springer Text in Education, the A to Z of the PhD trajectory, that was published a little less than a year ago. And I also have this free book that is on the Bookboon website called Top PhD Advice from Start to Defense and Beyond. It was written for PhD students in the Netherlands, so it says focus on the Netherlands, but it has some universal tips and tricks. And as I said, it's free, so you can download it and read it as you like. Here you have my contact information as well as my website where you can find a lot of posts that deal with these topics. So I would like to thank you for your attention again, and if you have any questions, I would be very happy to address them.
Thank you, Professor Eva. Any questions? Anyone? So before anyone makes any question, I would like just to complete about, to tell people more about your book. We asked Professor Eva to focus on the time management part of her book, but it goes over other aspects of the academic life for a PhD candidate or master candidate. So especially for a student that is starting grad school right now, it's a really helpful tool for you to organize your life in a new city. For example, most of the people in this room are not from São Carlos, so her book does give tips for you to how to firstly contact your supervisor, how to discover a little about the city, how to go to the programs and go to activities that you probably are not going to be able to attend, for example, before your qualification or your defense of your master's or thesis in the future. And I would ask her, like after speaking about a little about her book, I would ask her about the importance of training writing. If you can talk to us a little about the importance of practicing writing every day, as you state in your book. Okay?
Sure, that's a very good question. So, as you've seen in my weekly template, even right now, I still write every day. But even during your PhD, during your master's, I think it's important to set aside a little bit of time every day to write. And that can be just reflecting on the work that you've done that day. So there's an eternal discussion that you may find on different blogs. Some people say you should start writing your PhD thesis from the very first day of your PhD program. There's other people that say this is not good advice. You should just write it. You should just start writing when you have everything ready. And there's always a discussion about that. Now, my opinion on this is that you should write every day or every work day. If you want to spend your weekends doing other things, that's a good idea. What you write every day will not necessarily be work that goes into your thesis, into your master's or PhD thesis. But what it does is practicing writing every day, and that can be, as I said, it can be a very large number of things. It can be short reflections on the research that you were doing that day and the insights that you have. And in my book, I have some templates that you can use to set up a what I call a research journal, in which you write down and reflect on the work that you do every day. It can also be writing short discussions on an interesting paper that you've been reading. It can be writing, trying out just, for example, testing one formula against one set of experiments and writing out these formulas and your results in a short report that you can then send to your professor to discuss. All of these small things, what it does is it helps you along the way finding your voice. So I don't think that using the last 3 months of your PhD is enough time to find your voice. I don't think it's enough time to find how you want to write, what is your writing style, and that's different for every academic. I think it's a long process, and the more you try to bunch it up in a short period of time, the more stress you will put on yourself. So if you compare it to training a muscle, your writing muscle, if you haven't published technical work before, it's a muscle that you need to develop and train. So just every day writing a little bit, even if it's just 200, 300 words, just a little bit of practice every day will help you get into the right shape to find your writing voice by the time you need to write your dissertation.
Nice, thank you very much. Any other questions? I have just a last question. Someone gave me written, so I just read it for you. Mm-hmm. Even though the presentation was about 10 things that we should know before beginning our PhD or our master's, it's a more specific question, but do you have any tips for a Brazilian student that plans to go abroad for pursuing a PhD?
That's certainly a good question and a broad question, of course. It depends how well defined you already have your plans for the PhD. It can be that you're just thinking about going abroad and you still need to decide where in the world you would want to go to and where the opportunities lie. So if that is the case, the big issue is always funding, right? So in that case, I would say be open, tell your professors that you're interested in going abroad and ask them if they know about colleagues that are looking for students. That's typically the most direct way. See if there's national or international programs that you can apply to get funding for your studies. Because of course, that's always the first step, seeing where you could find funding for the program as well as for any experiments that you would want to do that would be part of the research. Now, if you have already cleared that, if you know I'm going to this university in this country, part of that I talk about in the second chapter, the introduction chapter, or the sort of starting with your PhD chapter in my book. But essentially, the idea is take time when you go to a new university to learn how things are done there. So take the time to get to know how people work in your new lab, get to know the new city, because if you don't do it at the beginning, chances are that you won't do it, unless maybe when your family comes to visit and you want to do the touristy things. Another thing would be take time to get to know your supervisor, find out the way he or she likes to work and how you can work together and clear out any doubts you have from the beginning, as well as get to know your colleagues, what they're working on, so you have an idea of the different projects. So that would be a few things that I would recommend when you go and start at a new university.
Nice. And just one last question. Can you share with us the slides for this presentation?
Sure. I will put them on SlideShare and I will send you a link.
Nice.
And I will put them on my blog as well in some time.
Okay, so just one more announcement. The librarians are trying to get your book for our library here, so they're going through the bureaucratic steps to get the book, but soon I think we have the book in the São Carlos School of Engineering library. And we thank you very much for your time, for enthusiasm, for your presentation, Professor.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.